while they're en route, because I might shut up after this, all things are possible. But the suggestion I'd like to give, because I mentioned the idea of conferences. I saw some of you looking sort of, what does that look like, if you will? What I tell students to do is when you meet with a program officer, you don't have to have a developed idea. Your job is to make them talk. That's your purpose for being there. Whenever you interact with someone, if they talk a lot, they're going to think it's a good meeting. And so it's true. And so what I ask people is, as a program officer, forget my idea, doesn't matter. As a program officer, what are 3 things that you see in all good proposals? And then in bad proposals, what are 3 things you see in all bad proposals? And just let them talk for 15 minutes. And whatever they say, feverishly write like you're paying attention. Just play the game. And that's a great use of time.
Ready? Yeah. Okay, great. So we decided that Keith and Brenda will just give their own little intro. And then I'm going to start off with questions for the 2 of you.
Okay, so I'm Brenda Greene. Is this on?
Yep.
Okay, so I'm Brenda Greene. I am a professor at Medgar Evers College, chair of the English department, and founder and executive director of the Center for Black Literature, and I also direct the National Black Writers Conference.
I'm Keith Wilson. I'm a practicing sculptor, and I'm director of the Center for the Humanities here, but I have more experience of the UK system. So I'll talk about direct funding rather than grants here.
So we'll just start with a very simple question. Sorry? Oh, the slides. Yes, this morning we had them. Well, you weren't here this morning. We explained this morning. So the slides are slides of projects that have been funded for all 3 of the panelists. And just to give you a sense, rather than a PowerPoint, we thought this would give you a better sense of their projects. And they'll just be on a loop. So maybe Brenda and Keith, we'll start with you. Can you talk about the first time you began a relationship to establish funding for a project?
Yeah, it actually was kind of an accident. I was on sabbatical, and I had an opportunity to run what was the oldest independent black bookstore in Brooklyn, in Kuru Books. And it was at the time when when bookstores were really going out of business. And so this small bookstore was really hard to manage. And so I decided to restructure it into a not-for-profit organization. It became the Nkuru Center for Arts and Culture. And to do some of the things that I love doing at bookstores. It was just book readings and signings, and we had a theater club. But in order to do that, we had to get funding. And so one of the things we did was to set up an advisory board, and one of the members said we should bring in someone who knows about development. And that was my first time really thinking about what it meant to raise money, because I had been a faculty member for, at that point, it was about 20 years. And I'll never forget what the development officer said. She said, raising money is glorified begging. It's really glorified begging. And one of the board members directed us to someone who was working at Ford. It was their last, Ford had some funding left. They had 1 year left, and we were able to meet with them. I met with them, and I would say the niche is whatever you're passionate about, to talk about what you're passionate about. One of the things we had at that bookstore, we used to have something called foundations. We'd have to do fundraising for the bookstore. We had poetry slams every weekend. And the young people were so strong. The poetry slam, I said, this is something that should be part of the educational system. This is something we should be doing in the schools. There are a lot of bright young people here. So when I went back to Medgar Evers College, the other thing I did while I was on sabbatical is I wrote the grant to found the Center for Black Literature. So when I went back to Medgar Evers College, I said, we should have some programming for youth around the spoken word. And I approached CUNY, and I wrote a proposal. And CUNY funded a program to do professional development the CUNY collaborative programs to do professional development for teachers and to start a program that we still have in place called Re-envisioning Our Lives Through Literature. And Re-envisioning Our Lives Through Literature is a project where we go into the high schools and bring teaching artists into the high schools and work with young people to get them to read literature, to write plays, to write stories. They do a production at the end. That program started in 2003. We've gotten it funded through various grants, through, at one point it was the former Brooklyn Union, the City Council, the New York State Educational Foundation, the, not education, New York State Education. At one point we had, I think Brooklyn Union, I told you Brooklyn Union. So we had various, Target was another one. We had various people who funded it. And I just want to close with, it's so important to find out what your niche is, because after I founded the Center for Black Literature and began to really have to raise money while I was still teaching, I had an opportunity to meet with Con Edison. Who would think Con Edison would want to fund the arts? And so I went to Con Edison and I was so passionate, made a passionate presentation about the work we do and the writing and the literature. And they said, we normally don't fund that, but you are so passionate about this, we have to find some money for you. And ever since then, they have found money for us. And it's a give and take. At one point they said, well, you're doing these conferences and you're doing these youth programs, but we really should be doing something around the environment. So what did I do? Came up with a panel on looking at literature that addresses environmental issues. The bottom line is that you have to look at what the funder wants, continue to cultivate the relationship, as I said, that I've been in for 15 years. I ran into them a couple of weeks ago, and they said to me at a book literary festival reception, and they said, we didn't hear from you yet. Where's your proposal? So that's a result of cultivating that relationship and being very clear about and excited about what my niche was, what the niche of the Center for Black Literature was, and what we needed to do, and how we're going to make sure we continue to have that funding.
Great. I think I would follow on with that passion thing. That's how everything I do ends up happening. I've got a very short one and then a longer one. Can I do them both? One is I was on the board of Whitechapel Art Gallery when we were going to take on a building next door, buy a building next door. And the rest of the board were made of money, and I wasn't. But I knew what I was there for. I was there to be an artist. And there was a huge endowment with which we could buy the building next door. And I just knew I had to step in and say, this money comes from artists. Artists love the Whitechapel. When we make this deal, we have to make sure that this endowment exists in the form of the building to preserve that which is loved by those artists who donated those works, which became the endowment. It's just a very simple job, but it's to remember who you represent, why you're there, what your passion is. And so invisible to the project is this fantastic deal that sits just under the surface, one of the best property deals in London. Now, you could have, if you sat around there, thought, actually, this money comes from the auction. I know everyone who put this money together. But by remembering what you're there to do and why you're there and what you're preserving, it was able to change the nature of the deal that was struck. And a longer one. I want to go from just a sort of incidental through to policy, as it were. So I was doing an exhibition called British Art Show. It tours the country. I was doing different works each time, and I always work outdoors. And I think it must be something to do with my personality that I don't like to be in the building. I like to be out there and see where we are and do stuff wherever it is. So the final piece of this puzzle was down in Plymouth, which is where, when the British Navy is down to 3 boats, it'll be in Plymouth, because Plymouth's this amazing, beautiful, natural harbour. And the developers there were these kind of lively young Manchester company called Urban Splash. So they were hosting us. Most of the artists who came and did the show were griping about whether the walls were finished or the installation quality or whatever. But I was really interested in what I thought was a fantastic development that these guys would do. So once I'd installed my work, I went and I met with the developers and I said, this is great, show me around, where did show me around it's all a big Admiralty military headquarters. Where's the seawall? Okay, my piece had so we were showing in a slaughterhouse. So where did the animals come in? And it was just this beautiful seawall that framed the whole of the development, had a blocked hole in it that was where the animals used to come in from the sea. It was America's Cup down there. And I went out on the boat. They said, oh, come along, you should see this from the water. So we went out on the boats and we looked back. And I said, this view you've got on your site, if we open that wall. And so this was a piece of work that I gave them, as it were. This was over Champagne on a boat. They knock a hole in the wall. It's completely stunning. It's my favorite. If you're ever down there, Royal William Yard, go through the tunnel and it's just like a miracle. It also had a sub-theme of global warming because the high tide nearly flooded the whole site, but they forgave me that. Much later, when they were doing a development in Sheffield, in the north of England, they approached me and the small arts organisation that I was working with at the time to come and look at, they'd taken on Europe's biggest listed structure, is this flawed estate called Park Hill. It's a huge estate. It became very notorious in the 80s when the Thatcher kind of decline of the industrial north. It became a no-go area. It was pretty much battened up. And they wanted to do something with, they wanted to have an arts identity to this site. And so I worked in a triangle. I was the artist, the sculptor who might look at the landscape. We ended up doing, there's a piece that will pop up. You'll see it's a drive-through inner city sculpture park in the north of England that's within this residue of a sort of Le Corbusier. The other person had been 25 years with this very integrated arts organisation, studio, costed studios. All right. The third person was a PR and marketing person from them, really good person. The three of us took this on as a project, the cultural face of this development, and learnt how we present, how much passion, how much PR, how much marketing, who speaks when, at which meetings do I zip it, at which meetings is it really. We ended up having fortnightly meetings with the head of the council in Sheffield, and we took a bid direct to government because we'd been looking at Northern Powerhouse policy. We nearly got 10 million. We got 1 million. We were in the budget. That's how quick it came from knocking a hole in the seawall just as a chancer. That was on their very next project. When I'm back in the UK next week, I'm meeting with them looking at a site in the middle of Birmingham, which is going to be City of Culture in 20 years. The development of a relationship is about being interested in other people. And that was a classic, to me, coincidence of different voices that could coalesce around a project and get directly to us. This was not a funding bid, but it was.
I think, Juan, you answered this question. Do you want to answer this? Yeah. So this brings us to an interesting distinction. As I was listening to them talk, and we had discussed this in a pre-planning call also, there's a difference between, or is there, accidental and intentional grant seeking, intentional or accidental fundraising. So can you talk to me about, if you think about those differences, they just kind of blend together, or how do you, how often do you go intentionally for certain grants, or how often are you finding that these spaces open up as you're talking about your project?
I want to go back to the whole idea about collaborations and what you do at conferences and what you do when you go to these literary functions or art functions. I mean, part of what you're doing there, you should be thinking about being deliberate and creating partnerships when you are networking with people. So you can have, we talked about informal networks and more deliberate networks. So part of a goal I have in running the National Black Writers Conference is expanding it across the country and creating these smaller and satellite conferences. So how do I get partners, and how do I get people to want to collaborate. I talk about what I call a virtual team. So I have the virtual team who, because you're not going to see them all the time, but when I go to certain conferences or meetings, I go with the intention of saying, let's talk about how we can collaborate. And that collaboration may not necessarily be money. It may be helping to promote the conference, or it may be programming, helping with programming, but it ends up creating a win-win situation for everyone. I think one of the things I've realized as a faculty member in English and the humanities is we're used to working on our own, and we don't understand the importance of really deliberately creating collaborations with other people. And sometimes I see that almost as my job, is to think about, okay, if we want to get a program or a grant, I have to think about who can I call on to work with me. So in answer to your question, sometimes it's you're talking to someone and they said, that sounds really interesting. Let's look at how we can collaborate and work on a program together or grant together. And then sometimes someone will, as has been said earlier, will call you. Had someone call me who's working for a foundation now. She said, I've been watching you for years with the National Black Writers Conference. I'm now in a position where we can give you some money. Let's sit down and talk. And that's because you're out there. If you're not out there, you're not putting yourself in a position where you can be there. You have to be out there. You have to support people if you want them to support you. So you have to make yourself available.
I would say, one an analogy that I would have is a group show. As an artist, you do solo shows and you do group shows. In a group show, you pretty quickly realize who you're going to work with again and who you're not. And it's to do with the approach of the other people that you're working on a shared project with. Also, on the other side, if it's the funder that you've worked with repeatedly, very often you start to see the world through their lens, and very often you're not the right answer. But if you're aware of their wider objectives, you can help them set up for a successful project where you don't see any of the money, but the project's a great success. They're going to come back to you. They're going to remember and they'll come back to you. And that really, I think that's key. I think that's a lot of what I do with repeat funders, is make sure it's the right answer rather than make sure the answer is always your organization or your institution. So it's sort of light touch.
I don't think anything happens accidentally. No one accidentally gives you money. And if it does, hang out with me, please. I want some of your luck. Here's how I think about grants. So there's this bottle of water, and let's say, for example, it belonged to Helen, and I want to buy it from Helen. And I say, Helen, how much is that bottle of water? And she says, oh, it's $100. So we could fight all day long about whether or not that bottle or that container of water is worth $100. A conversation we're not going to have is, does the $100 exist, or does the bottle exist? When it comes to grants, you're asking someone to give you money for something that doesn't exist. And that's a whole other level of thinking. It's a very different level of thinking. And back to my colleague from Medgar was sharing, putting yourself in a space where you can give and get simultaneously, and in that level of thinking, I think is important. None of us want to feel used. And there are people out in the world where me personally, when I see them coming, only because they want money from me. It's never a conversation of what can they do to help me. It's what I can do to help them or their cause or whatever. And so I'd be mindful of, putting yourself in that space. And as he was sharing, be willing to give. And sometimes you're not going to get anything back from that. But what will happen now, the example you gave of where someone came back, saying, oh, I remember years ago you were doing la la la, and I wasn't in a position to fund that, but now I am. Are you still doing la la la? And I'm like, well, how many zeros and commas are we talking? Yeah, I'm still doing la la la. It's my favorite project, as a matter of fact. But it does circle back. But you've got to put yourself in that environment. And at those same conferences, as I tell my graduate students, don't just go to meet funders. Go to meet those who are funded. And those are typically an easy session to find. Because for me, whoever is funded at $1 million or more on their session, or their colleagues who are also funded for $1 million or more. And so you can go to one session and meet 4 folks from different part of the country who are rolling in dough.
One thing I would add, I don't think there's necessarily a huge separation between accidental and intentional. What I would say is that, especially for some of you folks who haven't been thinking along these lines, you've not really been thinking about, I need funding when I'm going to the conference. You're thinking about something else. The thing that binds all this together is this idea of being very impassioned about your project and being willing and open to talking about it to all sorts of people. That's the first step. That's the step that opens the door and brings people into the conversation. And so it can happen accidentally, as I would say, in that you're talking to someone, you're not really thinking about funding, but you're talking about that project, and the person you're talking to actually might suggest another step, the next step for the project. So for example, I was talking about a project with someone I knew, a friend of mine, and I was clearly very interested in the project. It's my project. I was thinking of it as my project. That's the step that you don't want to be limiting yourself to. And she said, that would be an interesting project. How about if we did this project? And then it became larger. I know somebody who could fund this project if we did it in this way. So even though I would say it was somewhat accidental in that I wasn't thinking about funding at the time, even though I think about funding all the time. But because you're talking to someone who you don't even realize can connect you to someone else, that's kind of accidental. And then, of course, you have to seize on the opportunity. So what everybody's saying about putting yourself out there and talking about it, in academia, there's sometimes the idea of, this is my idea. I don't want anyone to take this idea, or some funder's going to steal this idea. Nobody's going to steal this idea. I mean, to write a book, you don't just steal an idea. That takes years. So nobody's really going to steal that idea. So if you share that idea and are open to it, of course have to manage it, because certainly there are situations in which people will take advantage of certain ideas, and be careful. That kind of sharing and passion, it sounds very idealistic, but actually in the way that the funding world works now, that is how people expect you to work, to be working collaboratively and together. And funders, especially for giant projects, they want to see those collaborations. They expect to see those collaborations because they think of themselves in that space as being a national conversation, a real game changer. And to do that, it's not one person.
Can I piggyback on one point you made? I think it's very important. It's a seed of death and destruction if you are so concerned that someone's going to steal your idea. Just let that go. I've seen people walk around with that level of paranoia, and I'm like, you're not that brilliant, It's just my running joke is I see my ideas like I do my man. You can touch it, but you can't do to it what I do to it. So he gonna come back to me, boo. So, and so the idea, but I do see a lot of people who are just so concerned about someone stealing their idea. And so therefore they don't share it with anybody, or they covet it. And I guess that might work if it's an article or a book that 8 people might read. But at the end of the movie, if it's going to be a grant, something that's larger than just a travel grant, you really got to be willing to share and get your stuff out there and talk about it and be willing to shape and frame it based on what the circumstances dictate. But I do see that a lot.
Yeah, I want to just add something to that too, particularly when you're working with like-minded organizations. If you anticipate that someone wants to do something similar to you, you go to them first. You can anticipate what the response was, so you become the leader. You take the lead and invite them in. And that's one way to ensure, they say keep your friends closer, your enemies closer, and I'm putting enemies in quotes, because there are people, you're saying, people will steal your ideas, but I've seen over the years where projects and programs you put together, then next year I see the exact same thing. So what do? And you anticipate that and invite them in. So it creates a win-win situation for everyone.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your particular approach to cultivating relationships. I know you've talked about it in some ways, but also how to make sure that the people you want to know about your some new project you're doing, or some advancement in your career. If you send them invitations to think on a practical level, what is your approach to cultivating these relationships?
I would say do very little of it, be very targeted, and nobody wants a wall of information about things they're not. You should know who will be interested in which thing that you're doing. There's a lot of editorial there. I don't have, every time I have to trawl through the list to think who is going to really want to receive this communication. If it's a general project and you're contacting people out with that project, you think carefully about. Otherwise, it can come up in conversation. It can travel by the normal means, but I wouldn't blanket people with. It's not useful. It doesn't seem like you're thinking on their behalf if you do that. So.
Well, to add to that, for certain funders or going to certain meetings, we make up folders, folders representing the work. Carry that with me. For certain programs we have, we target certain groups to come. So it's targeting the individuals who you want to know about your project, and that's ongoing.
I would actually say that of course, it should be targeted, of course. You don't want constantly to be inundating people with messages, but it is important when you're developing a project to be a little thoughtful of who might be interested in the project or who should possibly know about the project, and contacting or making that information available for people. If you're not someone who's constantly sending out a million emails and bombarding people with me, people aren't going to run away from information you send them. So you will find, and some of us are a little more shy, and it's more difficult to naturally be constantly talking about what you're doing. But if you're thoughtful about it, there are people who will want to know and do want to know, and there are ways you can do that in a targeted way so that to include those people. So it feels more like an inclusion, and that's not necessarily pushing yourself out there all the time. You'll know how that feels and the difference. And I don't find that people in academia tend to be, bombarding people with information about themselves all the time. In our particular culture, a lot of people do that. People in academia, not as much. So I think for many academics, it's not something that they naturally would think to do, but it's something that people in their networks might want to know about and might want to contribute to, might want to have a say in, or send it on to someone else they know.
Yeah, I just want to also add that sometimes I do personal letters. There's nothing like saying "Dear so-and-so" and actually using their name so they don't feel like you're just sending it to a large group. When you personalize some things, people respond to that, and they will write you back. And I find that ends up being helpful. It's all about, goes back to what we've been saying all day, is cultivating the relationships and figuring out how you can sustain it, because we all get very busy. So I haven't seen you in a long time. I'm working on this project. Do you think you might be interested? And so they feel like you're invested in them, and they're willing to listen and invest in you.
I would say the same. So if you have a communication that you have to make, there's no problem with dropping a link under it. Oh, by the way, and I think that's a very elegant way of doing it. It's that it's already in a conversation. It's sort of embedded in a conversation. You're not demanding that they do anything with it, but you're just, you're nodding in the direction of something that you might be going back to them on the back of. So it's.
And I also want to I'm sorry, you mentioned it before, the people at foundations putting the call in, saying, I'm thinking about this project, even if they've continued to fund you, again, picking up the phone and saying, let's talk, even though you might already know what the answer is going to be, but there's nothing like letting people know that you continue to be interested.
Right. Often at the Graduate Center, and I'm sure at your universities, you have public programs. That's an easy way to do that. If there's something you think, oh, so-and-so at this foundation or so-and-so who is a board member, whoever it is, they might be interested. It doesn't have to do with your project, but it brings you to mind to them, and it brings them to your college or wherever where they can show more interest, and just keeps them in mind. And often you find it's not just the program officer. It might be the associate assistant so-and-so, and they're very appreciative because people don't pay attention to them. So there's all different ways to think about how other people would be involved, and you actually don't know people's roles in different organizations. I think maybe at this point we might, unless you want to make some additional comments, open it up to the audience. I'm sure there might be some
Sure, I
things
think
that
there's just one other thing I'd say, which is don't assume, because, it's a Wizard of Oz thing, don't assume there's a brain when you look up. And that's as true of an institution as it is of a funder. The fact that you know there's a policy doesn't mean the policy's worked out. If you can provide something which might be the solution to the driver for that policy initiative, that can be as helpful to the person who's in charge of driving the policy as it's not that they know what the answer is they're looking for. That's all I'm saying. So if it's got a whiff of being right, dress it up to suit and present it well, and you might help shape policy.
Great. So we would like to ask people in the audience to come up. Any question? No questions too small. It'd be great to hear from some graduate students too, because I know there's some here, and we haven't necessarily addressed some of their questions, I think.
So I want to make a few comments because this was a very good presentation, actually right on. First of all, my name is John Sapogas. I didn't mention it before. I'm Director of Award Pre-Proposal Support at the Research Foundation, and a sponsor of this event here today, in addition to a lot of other events that we do throughout the year to help faculty develop their expertise, going out and getting funding. I served as program officer at NSF for 30 years before I came to this job. In listening to this discussion and thinking back, I'm quite surprised as to how few faculty actually reached out and contacted me, considering the amount of funding that I had available to me. And I think there is kind of a little bit of an element of fear on the part of faculty sometimes in reaching out to program officers. And I think that rightfully so. I mean, I think you need to be concerned when you're talking to a program officer. You do want to put your best foot forward. But there are a few things that were mentioned here today. So as I think back, what are the things that I was impressed about faculty when they came to me? The first thing was passion about their research. It was mentioned a number of times here today. Without passion, you can't convince anybody. Even if you have an objective review panel making decisions about awards, the passion is the most important characteristic. In fact, I've seen many, many proposals where the science is excellent. The reviews are excellent. But I felt very nervous about funding it because I didn't feel that the PI had enough enthusiasm about what they were doing. Yeah, there was good science, but not enough passion. And there are a lot of projects that were funded from that perspective. But I think it's more likely you're going to get funded in the federal world if there's no passion than in the philanthropy world. I think there definitely has to be passion. And in the private world, there has to be passion. So I think it's very important that we keep that in mind, that's an absolutely important ingredient. The other thing that I thought highly of are some of those faculty that were didn't contact me once. They did it 2 times and 3 times strategically, and they did that with the purpose of developing a relationship with me. And when they did that, some of them didn't ask me for money. They asked me, what can they do for me? Can I serve on a review panel for you? Is there anything that I can do for you in terms of any policies or programs that you're developing Can I give you some advice? Is there anything I can do as far as setting something up at my university for you to come and speak? So as you're developing these relationships, I think it's important to always keep in mind that it's not just about getting money from them, it's also about developing a relationship so that you both help each other. And program officers are, believe me, are looking for assistance. They're looking for help. Because the one thing they're interested in is furthering their program and using the community as a justification for how they can get more funding, how they can get more money. So I think I'll leave my comments there. I don't want to be preaching, but I did want to share with you some of my experiences because I think a lot of the things that were mentioned here today were absolutely right on. But I do want to ask one question. Juan, your background, sociology, and yet when I look at your accomplishments, sociology is funded by NSF. It's an NSF scientific field, social science field funded by NSF. Your background also includes public health. It includes other areas as well. So to what extent was your experience very much driven by your desire to develop a variety of different skills in different areas so that you can attract more funding? I'm just wondering how that worked for you and how you've gotten yourself into so many different areas of research.
I'm just a girl who can't say no. No, I think I'm naturally curious. And I don't, when people say things like, you know, NSF doesn't fund X or Ford doesn't fund Y, you know, as Helen knows, I realize the fact that program officers, their job is to give away money. And sometimes if you just help people think differently and creatively. And so I've been told no before. And to me, you know, no doesn't mean no. No means I don't understand, I can't say yes, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess my mind goes back to one of the projects of mine you saw flashing up here was the SJS project. We started gathering money for that in 2008 when the economy tanked. And we had a $1.6 million budget for that project. And everyone was like, oh, you can't go raise money now because all the money's gone. And I was like, there's not no money. There's less money, but there's not no money. And until I see program officers on the street sculling for food, they have jobs. So I'll be the one they give the money to. And the idea of partnerships, you know, Nick Freudenberg was in public health. And that was not my field. But I was like, well, you know, I'm a part of the public and I like health. It's okay. So it's a natural fit. So being open to, and I think being curious, and I'm sure you've heard of ADD. Well, I have GAYDD, which is like ADD, but a little different in the sense I study sexuality and social justice. And so wherever that shows up, I'm interested. You know, so whether it's in physical sciences or in the humanities, at her writers' fair, I want to make sure that, okay, are we making sure that we got some lesbians and gay folk there? So I think just being open.
So when faculty came to me and asked, presented themselves as, what can I do for you? Mm-hmm. All those faculty, I went out of my way to make sure that even though they didn't get the big grants, I made sure that there was a $10,000 grant or a $20,000 funding opportunity I made available to them. So the relationship part is probably one of the most important.
And just to echo, sorry, Helen, but just to echo your point, to everybody, it is a thankless and time pit of a job. But if you can serve on review panels, I served for several years on review panels for NIH, and you saw literally some of the best proposals in the world, and I'm not exaggerating. And I wouldn't lift the ideas, but heavens knows I would lift structure. I'd be like, oh my God, that's a great way to present that. That never occurred to me. And I served on review panels for NIH, for NSF, for Ford, for the Elton John Foundation, I think it's called, that gives all the AIDS money away. And you see amazing proposals. And that's a really great way to, you don't get paid I wish you did, but, you don't get paid, but you do see behind the scenes and how the sausage is made.
I would also say by serving on panels, you can also see what the criteria is for reviewing the proposals. So if not that everybody has the opportunity, but if you served on an NEA panel, later when you apply for the NEA, you understand nuances that other people wouldn't know. So all the different ways in which you can better get closer to that decision, it's just helpful. And the ways that we discussed, many of the people here discussed, it wasn't because I want to get on that panel and that's my ambition, but you are talking to people, you're making yourself the expert, or you are the expert, and people are inviting you because they know you do this and they know you care about it, and just opens more doors.
I would just add to that you should also think about panels, even though you may not apply to that grant, think about serving on a variety of panels, because that does teach you structure, and it puts you in that pool of people when they're thinking across the board. So it may not be, we can't apply for the Council on the Arts, but I continue to serve on that panel. It's giving me the structure, and it's a way of networking and just keeping my name out there. So that's what you want to do.
And I think we have some questions. Wonderful.
Yes. Earlier, Sam Hurley, by the way, Queens College. Earlier, by the way, Dr. Peter and Dr. Sonia and the rest of the panels.
Could you speak a little bit more than Mike? Pick it up.
Sorry.
It's insightful, but just...
Earlier in the first panel, Dr. Peter and Dr. Sonia and the rest of the panelists mentioned that you must apply often and just apply more and more. And then y'all just said something about speaking to the right people. Is it encouraged to be annoying? Like, keep being persistent and asking questions? And if it is, what are those right questions? What are the right types of annoyance? Because John here, I'm not sure if it's Dr. John or Mr. John, but he's saying that he wanted faculty to come and approach him. But I'm pretty sure maybe faculty didn't know how to approach him, and they didn't know whether or not it was right to be annoying, or maybe just ask him questions about the funding that he's receiving. So even as a student, like, how do you navigate the right questions? How do you develop the right questions to either not be annoying or be annoying so you can get what you need? And like you said, Dr. Juan, like, it's not a no, but it's just not at the moment we have the right answer or the right answer that we need to proceed.
I would say, be annoying in whichever ways you're good at being annoying. If you want to form a panel to tell the funders they're wrong and they should be spending their money elsewhere, do that and invite them to that, but do it well. If that's not your way, if you want to do it, make sure that you're going to do a bit of research, see what the program that's been funded is, invite them to something they're likely to be interested in, meet them up, do the event, and then talk. Like, funding is a weather system. You want to find out from your program officer which way the wind's going to blow, and if they get on with you, they're going to tell you. They give you a heads up because it works for them, it works for you. So there's no single answer is what I'm saying, but it's like, play to whatever you're comfortable with, and there's always a way.
Don't be afraid to be persistent, in other words, and continue to write. If you get rejected, find out why, go back, talk to them before. If you get rejected, go back and talk to them again. Keep your name out there. And I always say to people, some people say, I'm echoing about being comfortable, but the people who get something are the ones who are persistent. The long distance runner, they're persistent. You're getting the attention. So don't be afraid of that, because those funders, program officers, heads of foundations are extremely busy. They have many people coming to them, and this is why they're going to pay attention to the person who's reaching out to them.
One last thing. As I was noticing the slides and what you was mentioning, what happened to you in London, I found back to what you were saying earlier about a purpose. Even when I'm talking to some of the students that I personally have, I feel you have to have a purpose for whatever you want to do, but it's hard to understand what your purpose is. It's hard to understand, okay, maybe I like to do this, but is that my purpose? Maybe I want to do it, but is that a purpose that I have? And it can become very difficult to get that purpose, but then you want the people, the funding, the networking skills to fester and to build. How do you...
Don't look in. Look at what's written in front of you. Right? If it sounds compelling, it will persuade you. You'll suddenly want to do it. Write it down. It's going to end up landing on someone's lap. They've got to read it and think, we got to do this. So you are the first person who has to read it and think, I've got to do this. So that's why people say write the bid and write again and write again. It's because you'll see what you believe and what seems to be true and what seems to be just like going for the money. And don't think they don't, that's absolutely legible to everyone. It's not, is this absolutely at core what I want to do? It's not the right way. Keep it on the surface. Keep it in the language. Does this sound like it has to happen? When it sounds like it has to happen, it's going to happen. And then everyone will come on board and it will happen.
And your niche, you have to be very clear about what your niche is. And even though, as you're looking at what's calling you, continue to focus and make sure that your niche, what's going to make you stand out, that you're very clear about your niche. One of the good things that's happened over the years is so many more proposals. I didn't like it at first, but so many more of them are online. You have to fill them out online, even with the foundations, which really gets you to zero in on what you're asking. It really makes you you really have to sharpen what it is you want and what is the impact going to be. So the clearer you are about what your niche is and how that aligns with your overall purpose, they're going to see that. That's going to come out.
I think I would approach it a little differently from my point of view, which is you really should start with your idea first. You can't really, it might seem like we're suggesting, do whatever the funder wants. That is not, in my opinion, not the best way to go. You have to be clear about what it is you want to do and then shape it from there rather than trying to fit it to what they want. It sounds like what we were saying was contradictory, but it comes from the kernel of your idea, whatever that is. So that has to come first. Then you look for the funding or whatever it is that will get you there. And what you were saying earlier about being annoying, there's a difference between being annoying and there's a difference between being really annoying. So in the first example, when you're annoying to the program officer, sure, contact them and try to find out what it was that didn't get you funded. And then you take that down and you apply again. And then the next time you make sure you took all of those things into consideration. So being annoying is a way to just cultivate the relationship and learn something. So every time you're annoying, it's an opportunity to learn something. If you keep going back and you didn't learn anything, then you're just really annoying. They won't want to talk to you anymore. So I had a particular funding opportunity. The first time we didn't get it. This was all the major universities for science. It was extremely competitive. We didn't get it. And I understood that because our particular program here was not even in the top 50. So that it was a long shot. But we talked to the program officer. Applied again. She gave us all these tips, and I thought, we'll definitely get it next time. Well, we didn't get it the next time. And she said, it was extremely competitive this year, and in that field, nobody was awarded. And I thought, we just didn't get it. And I thought, one more time, and that's it. And we talked again to the program officer, got feedback, and once again incorporated it. And the third time, we did get it, because we listened. So it was annoying in that we contacted her, but it wasn't annoying in that we didn't learn something from the contact.
My name is Eva Zhou. I'm in the Department of English at Baruch College. And my question is somewhat like the previous speaker, the first half of his question, about going back to program officers. I realize that the program, like NEH, say you can approach the program officer. And to some degree, what you replied in your last answer gives you a sense of how to approach it. But these would be for large, complex applications, right? I think the NSF one that you were referring to is also a large, complex application. What is the situation for people who are applying for the individual grants, the individual fellowships? I know the program officers themselves are trained not to, be forthcoming in certain ways, right? So some advice on that score.
I actually, before I answer that question, in the interest of time, can I suggest we take another question and then we each go around one time and then wrap it up? I think we're in at 2:45. Is that okay?
Sure.
I like that answer.
Paying attention?
That's okay, but you said yes. Yes, ma'am, your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Melanie Lewis. I actually work in admissions at BMCC, but I work with a lot of nonprofits outside of work. So one in particular, my place of worship, the Center of Rafa in Brooklyn, we're looking to promote arts, to promote healing. We're looking to promote healing through the arts. And my question is, how or what ideas would you have for me coming from the perspective of a worship center, an interfaith worship center, that wants to promote healing through the arts and create those cultivated relationships? I think sometimes when people hear anything spiritual, sometimes they tend to back up. So how would you suggest I develop and cultivate those relationships?
Maybe offer something else as well, so that you're offering something that's easier to go to for someone who might be skeptical. So the nature of the event, you can know what it is, but you can use a different language about how you get people across the threshold that they might have trouble with. And it's a sort of try different methods by which you invite think of the audience that you're looking to get and have that conversation. Would you come to this? Would you not come to, do your audience trial in effect. So rather than being insistent that you know what it is that you want them to come to, if you believe in what it is, it might still not be a simple matter of explanation of what's on offer there. You might have to go about it under different descriptors in order to get in an audience who doesn't naturally come. I think it's a difficult one. Yeah.
I just want to add, we talked briefly during lunch, and I suggested some of the centers who are doing, you might want to connect with centers at different colleges. But we have one of our longest running program is with the Center for Black Literature, is a partnership with Siloam Presbyterian Church, which is an elders writers workshop. So the workshop is actually offered at the church, and writers are telling their stories. So it's a partnership with a church, but it's using writers. If you can think about the medium that you want to use, if it's the arts, what part of the arts, the visual arts, the literary arts, is there a way that you can partner with an institution that is already promoting the arts and you bring in your dimension to that?
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Partner on a fundraiser. That can be another way where you go hand in hand with an organization that's going to bring its natural audience to something, and you're fundraising towards maybe two different goals, but you're going to have two audiences coming to that occasion. And that's when you can make available the literature.
I just wanted to answer the previous question or give a response to it. So, as I said in the beginning, every foundation is different. And you have to, if it's not posted what the guidelines are, you can try to make the contact. Some program officers will not speak to you. Some foundations will not give you any feedback. And that's not because you're not persistent or annoying enough. They won't do it. Others, they very easily do it, or it depends on the program officer. So the experience I was speaking about before, that program officer felt that she was comfortable, and it was within her duties to make that explanation to people that approached her. And she made it very clear when we contacted, if you have a question, please let me know. So you try, and if you can't make contact, that's fine. If you can, that's terrific, because you'll learn for the next time.
Can I just add to that too? Because sometimes at an organization, they give you the list of the program officers all for that area. So if you don't get one, you can ask another. And I've done that before too. Sometimes I've gotten two calls back from different, so I'm getting two different perspectives. They don't necessarily know, but it helps.
I've also gone one step up. If you don't have a good one and you can't make it work, see who's next in line and find another route through. So sometimes it's just diminishing returns. You can't make anything work. I had a totally brilliant one in Sheffield who came to everything and loved everything and couldn't have been friendlier or more helpful. You're not going to get that the whole time. So you have to have plan B when that ease doesn't come.
So some agencies have policies, okay? Clearly, I worked at NSF, so I instinctively understood NSF. NSF program officers, before a competition, okay, is held, before a solicitation is issued, NSF program officers are there to help you, guide you with your ideas, guide you with your, some do it better than others. I was very amenable to the community. I mean, I sat down, had meetings with them if they wanted to talk to me ad infinitum about their project, because what I was looking for was developing good proposals. Once the solicitation is announced, in order to be fair to all of the applicants, NSF program officers usually will not talk to you. And the reason they won't talk to you is because they want to give the impression that they're giving this is a fair competition. Okay, they don't want to give an advantage to you over others. So timing is important here. If you talk to them before the announcement is made, yes, they will help you. If you talk to them after the announcement is made, very unlikely they'll talk to you. Very unlikely.
I think time for one last question, and then we'll wrap it up.
I just want to tell a little story. No, one line. Wagner's libretto for The Flying Dutchman was stolen by the Paris Opera and given to somebody. And he said, let this composer compose it. And we don't know who the other composer was. So that's my comment in response to stealing. I've found in things that have helped me in my career, this is a piece of advice, that if you meet people at a conference, I learned how to write grants at an educational arts conference where I met somebody and the person said, I will show you how to write grants. And she even referred me to places to get grants. I think a good, positive, enthusiastic attitude, as you said, is the key. And I met a very famous architect for a design project that was done on the bus because I had seen something of his. He gave me his card. He said, call me if you want anything. And that helped get grant funding from the organization I worked for and from NISCA too. So you never know. We're talking about the accidental and the intentional. Sure, there's things that are born after, gotten or not gotten, but accidental, I mean, if you're out there and you interact, that's the key. I don't have a question, but I just wanted to add to some of the wonderful comments.
Thank you. Thank you all for attending. And we'll be outside if you have further questions.